My daughter came home crying that Tuesday afternoon, and something in my chest immediately knew that whatever was coming would change everything. She was 16, strong-willed, resilient, not the type to fall apart over school drama or friendship conflicts. But this was different. She looked terrified, ashamed, and when I asked her what happened, she couldn't even speak. She just sat on the edge of my bed, trembling, and whispered, "Coach kept pictures. He said if I didn't do what he wanted, he'd send them to everyone." My blood went cold. Every maternal instinct I possessed ignited into rage. I made her tell me everything, piece by piece, each word like a knife twisting deeper. The photos weren't recent. They were taken months ago, sent under the guise of form checks for her athletic posture. They weren't explicitly sexual, but they were inappropriate, invasive, and he'd kept them. He'd been using them as leverage, threatening to distribute them to her teammates, to her school, to destroy her unless she complied with his demands. I remember the exact moment my world stopped making sense. I looked at this child I'd raised, protected, fought for, and I saw fear in her eyes that no 16-year-old should ever have to carry. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was going to burn everything down to make sure he never hurt another child. For weeks, I'd noticed subtle changes in her. She'd lost interest in volleyball, a sport she'd loved since she was 8 years old. She'd become withdrawn, jumpy whenever her phone buzzed. She'd started making excuses about practice, saying her shoulder hurt, that she was tired. I'd attributed it to typical teenage moodiness, to the stress of school and social media. I'd been so blind. But now the pieces were clicking into place with sickening clarity. Before we continue, we would like to thank all of you who support us by subscribing, liking, and sharing our content. The only appreciation we ask of you is that you subscribe, like, and share this video if you are not yet one of our subscribers. Thank you. Coach Daniel Reeves had been with the school for 9 years. He was beloved, charismatic, encouraging, the kind of coach who seemed to genuinely care about his athletes. He'd even been nominated for Teacher of the Year twice. Parents loved him. Administration praised him. He was the guy everyone trusted. And that's exactly what made him dangerous. I went straight to the police. I held my daughter's hand as she sat across from a detective, reliving the trauma, describing the photos, the threats, the manipulation. She was so brave, but it cost her something. I could see it in her eyes. The part of her innocence that died when she realized that an adult she'd trusted had preyed on her vulnerability. The detective told me they'd need to get her devices, that they'd need to investigate, that it would take time. Time. Meanwhile, this man was still coaching, still around other teenagers, still in a position of power. The thought made my skin crawl. I wanted to march into that school and expose him publicly, but the detective warned me that could compromise the investigation. So I waited. The hardest thing I've ever done. But I couldn't just sit idle. I started researching, digging, talking to other parents quietly. And what I found made my blood boil. There were other girls, at least 4 that I could identify from subtle conversations with other mothers. Some had already aged out of the program. Some were still there. And every single one of them had experienced the same manipulation, the same threats, the same violation of trust. One girl, Sarah, was only 14 when he started grooming her. Another, Jessica, had been pressured so intensely that she'd considered hurting herself. The devastation rippled outward like waves in a dark pond. These girls had been living with this secret, this shame, this terror, and no one, not parents, not administrators, not peers, had seen it. I organized a quiet meeting with the other parents. We sat in my living room, and the pain in that space was suffocating. We weren't just parents anymore. We were soldiers in a war to protect our children and hold a predator accountable. We compared notes, timelines, tactics. Reeves had been systematic, methodical, predatory. He'd identified girls with lower self-esteem, girls who craved validation, girls who were vulnerable. He'd built relationships with them, earned their trust, and then weaponized that trust against them. One detail kept haunting me. Reeves had a backup phone. A burner phone that he used exclusively to communicate with the girls. He thought he was careful, but careful isn't enough when you're dealing with parents who are willing to stop at nothing to protect their children. The investigation was slow, methodical, frustratingly careful. But after 3 weeks, the police had enough. They arrested him at his home before school even started. When the news broke, the community was shocked. How could someone so trusted, so seemingly upstanding, be capable of such darkness? But this is the terrible truth that haunts me now. Predators don't announce themselves. They hide in plain sight, Behind credentials and charm and a carefully constructed persona, the trial was brutal. Watching my daughter sit in that witness box, having to recount her trauma in front of him, in front of a courtroom full of strangers, was one of the most painful experiences of my life. I gripped her hand beforehand, and I whispered the only thing I knew to be true. "You're the brave one, he's the monster. Don't ever forget which is which." His defense was pathetic. He claimed the girls initiated contact, that he was just being supportive, that the photos were misunderstood. He weaponized his own charm in the courtroom, playing the victim, suggesting that jealous ex-students were lying. For a moment, I watched jurors' faces shift and I felt a primal terror. What if they believed him? What if he walked free? Before we continue, we would like to thank all of you who support us by subscribing, liking, and sharing our content. The only appreciation we ask of you is that you subscribe, like, and share this video if you are not yet one of our subscribers. Thank you. But then the evidence came. The burner phone, the photos, the messages, thousands of them, where he'd explicitly threatened to release images unless the girls complied with his demands. There was no denying it. There was no defense. The facade crumbled, and what remained was undeniable proof of a predator. He was convicted on 12 counts: sexual exploitation of a minor, extortion, possession of child sexual abuse material, and more. 53 years. He'd never see freedom again. When the verdict was read, my daughter finally broke down, not from sadness, but from release. The weight she'd been carrying, the shame that was never hers to carry, finally began to lift. But the trial wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of healing, and healing is messy and complicated and doesn't follow a linear path. My daughter struggled with PTSD for months. She had nightmares. She couldn't look at coaches or authority figures the same way. She questioned whether she'd somehow invited this, whether she'd done something to make him think she was willing. I had to keep reminding her what I knew to be true. None of this was her fault. None of it. The school district fired Reeves, obviously, but they also faced lawsuits for negligence. How hadn't they noticed? How hadn't the administration investigated the red flags? How many warnings had been ignored? The district eventually settled with all 4 families, but no amount of money could repair what had been broken. What shocked me most, in the aftermath, was how many people wanted to move on. How quickly the community tried to forget, to sanitize the story, to go back to normal. But we couldn't. Not those of us whose children had been violated. Not those of us who'd seen the darkness that hides behind credentials and charm. My daughter eventually returned to sports, not volleyball, but swimming. Something where she could rebuild her relationship with her body, with trust, with strength. It took time, but slowly. That light in her eyes came back. Not the same innocence, that was gone forever, but something harder, more resilient, more aware. I learned something profound through this nightmare. Predators are counting on silence. They're counting on shame, on fear, on the fact that most of us don't want to believe that someone we trust could be capable of such evil. They count on the system moving slowly, on girls staying silent, on parents choosing comfort over confrontation. But when we speak up, when we connect with other parents, when we demand accountability, everything changes. If you're watching this and your child is exhibiting sudden behavioral changes, withdrawal from activities they loved, anxiety around authority figures, or secretive phone use, pay attention. Your instinct is usually right. Trust it. Talk to your child. Report it. Don't let shame or fear keep you silent, because the cost of silence is too high, and the cost of speaking up is worth every battle. My daughter is 17 now. She's strong, articulate, determined to help other survivors. She's speaking with other teens about recognizing manipulation, about trusting their instincts, about knowing that if an adult makes them uncomfortable, it's not because they're overreacting. It's because something is wrong. Sometimes the hardest thing we do as parents is acknowledge that the world isn't always safe, that predators wear normal faces, that evil can hide in a coaching uniform and a smile. But the most important thing we can do is teach our children that they matter more than anyone else's comfort, that their safety is non-negotiable, that speaking the truth, even when it's painful, is always braver than staying silent.